Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thanks again so much for joining us today for our latest webinar in the Clarity in a Time of Crisis series. My name is Chris Adams. I look after research and insights at Miles Partnership. And for this 6th edition of our webinar series, we're going to jump in a time machine and return to 3 past crises for a look at some critical lessons and insights. What worked, what didn't work, and what we can apply today. And I'm going to introduce our veteran panel more formally in a moment, but we're delighted to be joined by Chris Thompson, DT Minnick, and Ursula Bowles. Do you want to wave, guys?
Hello.
Okay, so we'll come back to them in a moment. Greetings from the entire Miles Partnership family and team out to all our clients and the many people across the industry and around the world that we've connected with. So our look back at lessons from past crises starts with 9/11, of course, the largest ever terrorist attack on the US that grounded all commercial flights for a number of days. It, of course, constrained and impacted the tourism industry and flights for months, if not years, and travel, of course, returned very much with a new normal. So the Transportation Safety Administration was created out of that crisis. So we all had to fly and travel in different ways, and confidence in flying took years to recover. The great financial crisis broke upon the world in September 2008 with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the largest ever bankruptcy in US history. Things have been teetering for a while, but it all went spectacularly wrong in sort of September and October, and you can see the quote there from Ben Bernanke. A whole range of major organizations from AIG to the automakers needed to be bailed out. There was a significant recession, the largest ever since the Great Depression in the economy, a dramatic rise in unemployment, and millions of households had to declare bankruptcy, all with, of course, a cascading impact on travel and tourism. And finally, the explosion of Deepwater Horizon, the oil rig out in the Gulf of Mexico in April 2010, spawned one of the greatest environmental disasters in US history. 4.9 million barrels of oil spilled into the Gulf, affecting tens of thousands of square miles of ocean and huge parts of the Gulf Coast, with an indirect impact on tourism across all of Florida, even though most of its beaches remained largely untouched. So 3 crises, each challenges at the time seemed overwhelming and bewildering. None of them, of course, arguably rival the size and breadth and impact of the current crisis we're grappling with in terms of this global pandemic, but all of them have useful insights and lessons on what we can learn to review and refine how we're responding. And to provide these insights and actionable advice, our 3 expert sage industry veterans who weathered all these 3 crises are joining us today. All of them, of course, just as youthful, as energetic as they were back in 2001. So Chris Thompson, he's now President and CEO of the United States National Tourism Office, Brand USA. So Chris, where are you joining us from today, and where were you back in 2001?
So good day to everybody from wherever in the world you are. Today I'm in Tallahassee, Florida, my hometown. Been here for going on 10 weeks as it relates to sheltering in place. So I was fortunate that I had a pretty long run at Visit Florida. So I was in 3 different positions for all 3 crises. The first one, 9/11, I was actually SVP of Partner Development in the early years of creating that partnership for the state of Florida. For the financial crisis, I had risen to the role of Chief Operating Officer, and then for the oil spill, I was in my 2nd year of CEO of Visit Florida. So all with the same organization. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I realized, boy, we've been dealing with lots of crises in this short time.
Thanks so much, Chris, and we'll hear from Chris in just a moment. Ursula Bowles is Senior VP at Miles Partnership. And Ursula, can you update everybody on where you were back in 2001, before, of course, joining Miles Partnership a little later?
Yes, I was at Hawks Cay Resort in the Florida Keys on Duck Key. And then in 2007, joined Miles Partnership as CMO and worked with Visit Florida and continue to work with Visit Florida today.
Thanks a lot. And DT Minnick is President and CEO of Experience Kissimmee in Florida, and he's a real CVB veteran. So DT, do you want to update everybody on your various roles at those three crises?
Sure. So for 9/11, I was down in Fort Myers, Sanibel, running the Fort Myers, Sanibel CVB. I had just become executive director of that CVB about 6 months prior. For the financial and for the oil crisis, I was in St. Pete, Clearwater, running the bureau there in St. Pete, Clearwater. And now I'm here in Kissimmee, and I've had some folks actually joke around with me and say, maybe we shouldn't have hired you in Kissimmee because these disasters keep following you around the state of Florida. But so I've been in 3 different parts of the state for these different scenarios.
Thanks so much. And so the agenda for today, I'll ask each of our 3 experts to give some introductory remarks and comments. Then we're going to have a moderated discussion looking at these 5 specific questions. And I'll ask each of the panelists to respond and offer some insights and examples. We're going to be sharing some additional resources with you, and then obviously throughout, please ask questions. And my good colleague Andrea will be responding online in addition to myself, plus we'll be posing questions to the panelists. So thank you very much again to our association partners at Destinations International, US Travel, DMA West, and the Southeast Tourism Society. And thank you again for all the wonderful work they're doing to support our industry in this crisis. Of course, please check out our Clarity in a Time of Crisis education portal for information, updates, insights, and resources. All the slides and a recording from the webinar today will be shared with the audience and for everybody who registered, so you can take advantage of those. So without further ado, let me pass over to Chris for his opening remarks on the 3 crises, what we learned, what we could do better, and what we can apply today. Over to you, Chris.
So thanks, Chris, and thanks. Enjoy being with you, Ursula and DT, as we share some experiences. If I could go to my next slide. As I look at these crises, and I think it really applies to a lot of crises that we have to deal with, I really was grouping my learnings into 3 main categories, and then specifically an opportunity for the one that we're in right now. In most crises, the first bullet suggests that we are often dealing with perception versus reality, meaning always and in every case, you need to separate the facts from anything else, and particularly fear as it relates to the things that could be the worst case scenarios. In Florida, not only were we dealing with these scenarios, but we often deal with hurricanes, and hurricanes certainly introduce a lot of opportunities for fear and otherwise misperception. So I think it's critically important to separate perception from reality. I think it's also the case that you're always trying to find a way to restore consumer confidence. In many cases, because of the difference between perception and reality, and because of the way travel would be affected with any given crisis, you're always trying to restore consumer confidence in their ability to be able to travel, and in particular to your destination, for the experiences that your destination offers that are unique to any others they could find somewhere else. So as you'll see when we get into the conversation, restoring consumer confidence is critical in order to be able to recover from any one of these 3 crises and in any other crisis that you might be dealing with. And I think the third is one that I've had, I think DT and I both, but anybody in the DMO space have had to deal with. Dealing with crisis require a tremendous amount of cooperation between the public and the private sectors. in every case, as it relates to DMOs, they always have some public sector entity that they are either reporting up to or through or in partnership with. And cooperation in between those two sectors is critical. Hopefully you've been able to build a trusted relationship in the DMO's case with the public sector entity. And it's critically important that both the public and the private sectors are on the same page as it relates to messaging and are on the same page as it relates to marketing and any kind of response that's brought forward to in the recovery stage from a crisis. And then the last section, I would suggest that particularly in this opportunity, it's hard to talk about a silver lining when there's so many different ways that people are dealing with consequence and negative things associated with this particular crisis. But I think there's a silver lining and opportunity for DMOs. We look at the whole acronym DMO, and many people focus on the marketing side of the M in that acronym. But over the years, and particularly recently, we all realize that it's also about managing a destination. A lot of the concepts that are being talked about now are stewardship and sustainability. In a lot of cases, particularly on the local level where DT is, they are the stewards of community brands. They're the stewards of what that destination represents. And if they're doing their job, they're kind of weaved into a critical part of the fabric of destinations. And I think as we look at how this particular crisis is affecting the fabric of our communities, the role of destination marketing organizations and the critical role of the hospitality industry is front and center. And I think it gives us a great opportunity to reinforce the value of DMOs to their local communities. So look forward to getting a little deeper into each one of these areas as we move forward.
Thanks so much, Chris. And so let me pass over to you, DT, for your sort of initial insights on those three crises, how we responded, and what we can learn.
Yeah, so I think that I fully agree with all the things that Chris said. I think that every crisis we learn new things from, but every crisis is different, and every crisis, the key to getting through every crisis is communication. Whether it's communication within your internal team, communication if you're a DMO with your government officials, and communication with your partners, and then ultimately communication with your customer. This is kind of a 5-step thing that we have put in place, and I've had this put in place for different scenarios, including like the oil spill, kind of a respond, an engage, a rebound, an expand, and a resume. And then we fill in the boxes below that based on what the situation is, the current situation. I think one of the with 9/11, the scenario here that we've got is there's a lot of similarities with 9/11, where what you're going to find is people not comfortable in crowds, and there's safety issues and things like that, and we need to address those. With the oil spill, there's some things that are very similar with the oil spill, in the fact that we don't know when this is going to end. And with the hurricane, and Chris and Ursula and I have all dealt with hurricanes. Hurricanes have, we see the hurricane coming, we prepare, the hurricane comes through, we do damage assessment so we know exactly how long it's going to take us to get back on our feet, and then we do recovery and we come back. With the oil spill and with this situation, we don't know when the end is. We didn't know how long that oil was going to keep flowing and where that oil was going to go, and it could go on and on and on. This is the same way. We don't know. There's talks of, is there going to be a second round of this, and when are we going to? That's the number one question I think we're all getting is, when are we going to get back to normal? When are things going to reopen? When are the theme parks going to reopen? And it's like, we don't know. So there's very much similarities between each of the former crises and this one itself.
Thank you so much, DT. And then third, but very important, Ursula, you were working in the hotel sector. So what's your perspective on those three crises and what we can learn?
I agree with everything that Chris and DT echoed, and I'm going to get a little more tactical. I was in my office when 9/11 occurred, and immediately there was shock and uncertainty. And at that time in September, the Florida Keys is usually not as busy. We were at about 50% occupancy, and the first step that we had to take was, as DT pointed out, communication to our guests on site, helping them determine what was next. We had very few international and out-of-state customers at the time because 85% of our business was domestic and in-state, basically from Palm Beach south. But we also had business on the books that we had to address. And I guess what I would say is, while communication is key, being truthful and transparent and also being very flexible and nimble is really important. And I'll illustrate what I mean by that in a moment. Flexibility with your deposits. We refunded everybody's deposits with no penalty or gave them an option for deposit holds to come back for the future. For our group business, we gave them the ability to either cancel with the full refund or, again, come back at a future date that was meaningful and relevant. And with the fear of flying prevalent, we focused on enhancing our current market condition and tried to mitigate this fear of flying and create hope and optimism for travel within the state, and to showcase one of our natural attributes, which was that we were an island connected to US 1 by a bridge. So we immediately embarked on a photo shoot, and we trademarked the phrase, "an island you can drive to." And this one beautiful, simple aerial image, told this message visually. And I think we have an example of that. Thank you. Back then, we also had very limited communication. I was just thinking about how we communicated. I mean, we had our website, we had email, TripAdvisor and Expedia were fairly new. So we were limited with respect to how we could communicate, but we also had the benefit of more control in directing our marketing and our content. We capitalized as an individual independent resort. We had limited resources, and we relied a lot on Visit Florida and the Florida Keys for co-op programs, and leveraged our dollars that way, and participated in a lot of the offerings that were available afterwards that were focused in-state first, and then other drive markets, and then fly markets. So after Hawks Cay, I joined Miles in 2007 as the CMO, and I worked with Visit Florida during that time, and also during the time of the BP oil spill. And during those years, we developed co-op programs, we managed the website, email programs, along with content creation and distribution. If I think back, and this will be a good reminder for Chris, the budget at that time was about $26 million for Visit Florida. But with the diversified co-op offerings and the partnerships that we were able to bring in, at peak, the co-op revenue was another $13 million, which just showed the power of the industry coming together under a brand. And I think that, from a very tactical level, when there's loss of resources or funding, particularly, on a state and local level, it's very important for businesses to be able to have opportunities to extend their reach and their budgets. And we were able to, to do that. Fast forward, to now, we're working with Visit Florida once again as their digital, and their co-op agency partners, and are right now working to determine what type of cooperative programs will be available both in-state and out of state. But the one thing I really want to call out, what was missing in the past was Brand USA, our nation's DMO, which was not formed until May of 2011. And the robust platforms like Go USA and the social platforms allow consumers today to access channels nationwide and worldwide to be inspired and learn more about travel. Based on my personal experience and just, what I've experienced firsthand, I think that working together and having this national platform that works with states and destinations and filters down right through to the smaller attractions and hotels and the places that people really want to visit is super important. And that's a huge benefit that we can leverage right now in this unprecedented time that we're in.
Thank you so much, Ursula. So we'll jump into the specific questions that I'll pose to each of the panelists. And so starting with, in addition to what you've already shared, what are some practical examples of specific programs, projects, or initiatives from any of those three crises that worked, and what can we learn for the crisis we're confronting today? So I'll ask Chris, you to start.
Okay, great. So after 9/11, I'll reiterate one thing that DT said, that in a time of crisis, obviously you have a starting point of the crisis, but in order to recover and to re-engage, you got to have an ending point. And certainly 9/11 was a single event. And then once everybody got over the fear of was there another event behind it, then it was all about getting people back on airplanes. And that was, I think, the biggest challenge coming off of 9/11, other than the creation of TSA, as you suggested, and how that changed our world in flying. So the 9/11 response really was, in the experiences that I had in Florida, a cooperative marketing response with us at the state and our destinations at the local level, just to get the word out that it's safe to travel. You know, come on back. The experience that you've always been used to and looking forward to in Florida was here and ready for you. I guess it's a great example, as Ursula stated, when you have a chance to take $1 and put it with another dollar and turn it into 3 or 4 or 5 and extend resources. So 9/11 was a pretty cut and dry, and really just trying to get people back on airplanes and otherwise traveling. The great financial crisis, that was also very different to 9/11. It lasted, I think probably the early signs of it started in 2007. You know, it pretty much lasted the entire 2008, and then it came to an end in 2009. That was a situation that challenged people's wallets. You know, our response in Florida was that, you know, while our wallets are all challenged, we have a great opportunity to reach out to friends and relatives and to show them, to invite them to come to the United States. I keep saying United States, getting back to Florida, my Florida days, come back to Florida. So I have a real quick video I'd like to show that was just a rally video around the campaign that we created, which was inviting all Floridians to have an impact on their state and help out. The financial crisis affected us all, obviously, and we had to respond by trying to encourage people to come back out, even though their wallets were challenged. And I think the fact that we had tremendous diversity and experiences and opportunities allowed us to do that. And then the third example, which is the BP oil spill, that was really just a talk about perception versus reality, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But everybody had the thought that and the idea that there was oil on every beach in the state of Florida. Early in that crisis, when it happened on April 20th of 2010, I myself, when it happened, we're saying, poor Louisiana, but all the scientists at the time were saying, if it gets into the Gulf Loop, it's going to sling oil on the whole state of Florida, and that's all anybody ever remembered. And so we fought a perception versus reality issue where everybody was thinking there was oil on the beaches, and the only way that we were ever going to overcome that is closure. So in September, when they capped the oil spill, the oil well, we then launched in November of 2010 the Great Visit Florida Beach Walk, and we, in partnership with Google, we Google mapped all 825 miles of beaches in the state of Florida. We had consecutive press conferences on November 6th, which was a Sunday, in Pensacola, Miami, and we encouraged all of our residents to go out and take pictures and show the world that there's no oil on the beaches. So again, as I stated earlier, it's really overcoming perception from reality, and in this case, that was the state of Florida's response to that particular crisis.
Thank you so much. DT, do you want to jump in on this? What other projects or initiatives from any of those crises provide some lessons to today?
So I think definitely what Chris was saying, we kind of, from a destination standpoint, we kind of followed the lead of Visit Florida and what they were doing. So, during the financial crisis, we were promoting, people helping the state economy. And, that was the thing, is everybody was going after the in-state market at the same time. So that's always a challenge. We did some things after the oil spill. Chris is right. The perception was everything, and there was stuff that was out there that was just mind-boggling to us. Like, how do we overcome some of this stuff? Where this woman was flying into land in Tampa International. If you've ever flown into Tampa, you fly out over the Gulf and then you come around and land in Tampa. That's the airport for St. Pete, Clearwater, and Tampa. And she shot video out her window and said, look at all this oil that's on the Gulf of, this is right off the coast of St. Pete. And what it was the shadows of the clouds making the shadow on the water of the Gulf of Mexico. And she thought that was oil. And, there were things like that we had to overcome and say, there is no oil. And there was even a national, I won't say the name of the publication, there was a national publication that took a survey during the oil spill, and 55% of the people that responded said there was oil in Orlando. And Orlando's not even on the coast. I mean, it was just crazy, all of these misconceptions and things. And so with that, we were really, as Chris said, utilizing imagery and showing the images, showing people on the beaches with real time, this is the photo that was taken this morning from this beach. And with 9/11, again, what Chris was talking about with trying to rebuild confidence and safety to get people back on the airplanes. And there's some things that I'll talk about in a few minutes where we're working on some of those ideas to take them from 9/11 and put them into this real life crisis that we're in right now. But I think, that's the thing, is you've got to steer people's minds in the right direction and get them thinking back in terms of vacationing, in terms of getting, close to each other and those kinds of things. And one of the things during the financial was we were showcasing things that didn't cost a lot of money. You can go to the beach for free. You can build a sandcastle for free. You can do these different things with your families, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. So, with every situation, you just have to bend and mold and get those messages out there that resound with people to what's happening right now.
Thanks, DT. And Ursula, what would you add?
The only other things that I would add above being, flexible and nimble is that at a time where people are all fishing where the fish are, from a hotel perspective, I think the challenge becomes adding value and bundling and packaging as opposed to deeply discounting. I also think that, as each entity or business looks at what their key value proposition is, you leverage your assets in a different way. And, as the time evolved, there was more social media in the marketplace that had to be combated. So continuing to be truthful and continuing to back that up the way, Chris and DT illustrated is really important. Most of all, take care of your loyal customers, but also take care of your employees.
Very good. Okay, so let's move along to the next, arguably one of the absolutely fundamental issues. We're all in this crisis together. So what does 9/11, the GFC and the oil spill or other crises teach us about how to strengthen our relationships with stakeholders, whether they be residents, government at local and state level, or the industry? So again, Chris, first over to you about how do you collaborate and build effective partnerships with these stakeholder groups?
So if I could go to the slide that I have for this section, I want to speak from that. So we have a statement of purpose. I'm not going to go into depth about that statement of purpose, but the third of the 5 foundational elements of that statement of purpose, the one that's on the bottom, and there's a good reason why it is talking about building and maintaining trust. And that really applies to the government sector. It applies to the industry sector, and it applies to the resident sector in the case of the local DMOs, and in the case of recovering from different crises. When you look at 9/11, and you really can't, you have to build this trust, you have to build these relationships, and it has to be there prior to the crisis. You can't hope that you're going to build it in the middle of the crisis. If you don't have it at that point, then you're way behind the 8 ball. I will tell you that in all of these instances, Visit Florida for 9/11 was a relatively new organization. Jeb Bush was the governor. I remember soon after the actual incident, there was a Visit Florida board meeting at Amelia Island Plantation, and Governor Bush came to that meeting, and he came already willing to commit $2 million to a response to 9/11 to encourage people to get back on airplanes, to get back traveling, and to get back to the state of Florida specifically. When he sat there and heard the stories of how the different consequences of 9/11 were affecting the industry sector, I think it was a board of nearly 50 folks. He left that meeting, went back to Tallahassee, and his response turned out to be $20 million. And the co-op that was then put in place to respond to 9/11 was really a catalyst to kickstart Visit Florida's economy and do its part in encouraging all of our target audiences to travel, and specifically those coming to the state of Florida. Similarly, after the BP oil spill, the governor at the time was Governor Charlie Crist, and I will tell you that when that well burst off the Louisiana coast, nobody in Florida was all that worried about it. But then all of a sudden, because of what the experts were saying, everybody was worried about it, and we had everybody in Tallahassee and all over the state running around with their hair on fire. And so in that type of situation, you absolutely have to fall back on trusted relationships. And we kind of felt like we knew how to respond to this thing. We were sticking to our guns. We had legislators in the Panhandle calling us out for talking about what we were and we weren't doing. We again had Governor Crist come to our Visit Florida board meeting. It was held at the top of the Duval Hotel in downtown Tallahassee. And his exact comment, I went back and looked for it because I sat in that meeting, and he sat there and he looked at us. He goes, "I'm here. I get it. You don't have to twist my arm. I'm going to twist their arm." And he went back to BP and convinced the BP executives that they needed to bring forward resources to help the state of Florida recover and help the entire Gulf recover from the BP oil spill. I will tell you, in each of these cases, that only happened because of the trusted relationship that Visit Florida, in this case, the entity it had with the 2 governors. And in the case of the responses, I think what we had with the residents of Florida, and then in the cases of DT and the places that he was and all his counterparts around the state, the trust and the relationship that they had with their residents within each of the counties and cities within the state of Florida. So I think that's critical, and it can't be something you try to have happen in the middle of the crisis. If you don't have it before, you go into the crisis, then it's probably not happening, or it's going to be a lot more challenging for it to happen.
ET, what would you add to this?
Just kind of building on what Chris said, you know, we've when they brought me over to Kissimmee, they brought me over to privatize, to switch from a government bureau to a private bureau, but we still needed to obviously maintain our relationships with the county commission, with the elected officials, with the county staff, and you know, with the industry, we needed to show them that we really knew what we were doing, and we wanted, you know, I positioned it 5 years ago as we're going to become industry leaders, and you have to keep building that trust. As Chris said, if you don't have the trust going into a crisis, you're not going to get it while you're in the crisis. And so we've been building that over the last 5 years throughout the community. And you know, it's just communication, letting them know what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and that we are, you know, doing things that are innovative and progressive, and we're doing things that people aren't thinking of in terms of the DMO world. And what that does is it lays a really solid foundation. You know, when this whole thing started 2 months ago, you know, I brought my staff in and I said, you know, we have become in the last 5 years an industry leader. We're somebody that our industry partners, our 900 partners, look up to. They look to us for advice. They look to us, you know, for recommendations, and look to us to lead them through these types of things. This is our first major crisis as a private bureau here in Kissimmee, and we need to show them that, you know, we've earned that trust and that we're going to be there with them, for them, by their sides, as well as with the elected officials. And, you know, with the elected officials, what we've been able to do is really show credibility in terms of TDT expenditures. And what that does is then allows us to go to the county commission and say, you know, we need some dollars to help us on this recovery effort for this crisis, and we're going to be good stewards of those dollars, and we're going to use those dollars. You know, the best investment that you as elected officials can do right now is help us get people back to work. And how we're going to get people back to work in Osceola County is by getting tourists. Tourists drive everything in Osceola County. If we get the tourists back, everything else falls into place. But you've got to allow us to be able to do the job, be aggressive, and do the job that we need to do to get those tourists back. And we've earned that trust over the last 5 years by constantly showing them what we can do, how we can do it. But also, you know, we did not have we didn't have KPIs. We didn't have, you know, we didn't show before return on investment until, you know, we made this switch 5 years ago, and we're showing them what we're doing, how we're doing it, how it's working. And that's what's really built everything up to this point, and that's what allows us to really lead everybody and show everybody the way through this crisis in terms of tourism and tourism marketing.
Okay, Ursula, what are your quick comments on this?
Yes, from my personal experience, I've lived in the Keys off and on for 20 years, and I lived on Sanibel and Captiva. And when I first moved to the Keys, it was a small, sleepy little village that, you know, I am proud to say I helped promote and grow tourism for the years that I spent down there. But what you have in some of these smaller coastal areas is 3 types of residents. You have residents that work in tourism, that embrace it, they love where they live, they love where they work, they're thrilled. Then you've got a group of people who don't work in tourism. They may not love the traffic or the crowds, but they still appreciate the services, the variety, and the lower taxes. And then there's this third group, many of who come as vacationers and all of a sudden live there and decide they don't want anybody there. And I think that in this time of, in the circumstances we're in, where some of these communities have not had any tourism, there is a real upheaval about not wanting tourism back, or not wanting it back to the degree that it was. So just based on my own experience and what I'm seeing in the Keys and other places like that, is that the best thing that you can do is really focus on who you elect in official capacity so that you can have a very balanced and pro-tourism approach moving forward. And that has to be something that is worked on in a very granular and local level within each of these communities.
Thank you, Ursula. Just a time check, everybody. We're at 41 past the hour, so if we could move quickly through this next one, and some brief remarks on consumer confidence. Obviously, there's a lot of concern and confusion around COVID-19. Some of these past crises also had concerns of safety, as we've discussed. So what are some critical lessons we can apply today from those crises? Starting with you, Chris.
Yeah, sure. It's I think, as I said earlier, all these crises are a challenge in restoring consumer confidence. With 9/11, it was getting people back on airplanes. You know, with the great financial crisis, it was trying to convince folks that your destination, either due to geographic or experiential diversity, still had a plethora of things that you could do to compensate for your ability for your wallet not to go as far. The oil spill, it was to convince people there wasn't oil on the beaches. And, you know, I have to credit Roger Dow. I think he's the one that actually approached President Obama when President Obama at the time was in office and said, how can I help? How can I help the Gulf region? He said, take your family to the beach. He said, go swimming. Prove to people that the water's safe, the beach is safe, and that the seafood's safe. And he actually saw that opportunity, took it, and that immediately, I think, changed the perception of what the beaches look like in Florida. You know, as we look at the current situation, it is a crisis in confidence. It's a crisis in confidence across the entire travel consortium. If you look at the mode of transportation, if it's not yours, you have to trust that that's going to be safe. If you look at the destination you're going to, the experience you're going to have there, everybody looking at getting out and traveling again, whether it's international travel or even within our own communities or within our own state, we have to see that everybody, all the people that have an influence across the travel consortium are doing everything that we at minimum expect them to, or everything within their power to create a safe environment. That is a critical component to this. And with the uniqueness of this virus, as far as how it spread and the asymptomatic nature of it, it's a huge challenge. And we got to get the public and the private sector on the same page so that we can try to figure out how to restore that consumer confidence.
DT, what would you add?
So what we're looking at right now, and we're not ready yet because we're not in a totally reopened situation yet. But what we're going to be doing is bringing on some doctors and physicians and family health people. That some of them are bloggers, some of them have never blogged before. But we're bringing them into the destination, and we're going to have experts basically talking about what the destination is doing, what the attractions are doing, how to travel safely with your family, how to navigate through crowds safely. And so we're going to be really demonstrating at the destination level how you can have a safe but also enjoyable and great vacation. That's one thing. The other thing is, we have a great, we're blessed because we have, I always say, in Kissimmee, we have the world famous castle in the world. The castle that everyone knows is 20 minutes down the road. But 30 minutes from that castle, you could be kayaking amongst 300-year-old cypress trees in the headwaters of the Everglades, and you're virtually 30 minutes from the most incredible man-made attraction to one of the most incredible Mother Nature-made attractions. And so we're really going to be showcasing and promoting that while you can spend a day in the parks and do all of this, and you can do it safely, and the parks have your safety as their #1 priority, the next day, why don't you take a break and go back to nature? Go take your kids on a picnic, go kayaking with your kids where there's nobody around and it's completely quiet, and you don't have to worry about social distancing unless you're social distancing from a raccoon or an alligator. And so, that's the kinds of messaging and things that we're going to be doing. We're going to be relying on experts to talk about the safety, and then we're going to be really pushing, these other types of things that you can do and getting back to nature and getting back to, the family and those kinds of things. So I think it's a good combination, and that's kind of the approach that we're going to be taking.
Thank you, DT. Ursula, what's your take on rebuilding consumer confidence?
I think being truthful, I think being flexible, being nimble. We're going to move forward. We're going to have some setbacks. I think that listening to customers to continue to improve their experience, to hear what they're saying, what their concerns are, establishing the right protocols and evolving them is needed. And, I keep saying this, but taking care of our frontline employees. There are our first line of welcoming, and they are the ones that are interacting and providing those memorable and incredible experiences for our vacationing guests.
Hey, Chris, one other comment real quick. U.S. Travel is doing a good job. They just released kind of standards of safety that could really umbrella across all the verticals, and all the different trade associations are doing the same thing as it relates to the specifics for their trade experiences, delivering their experiences. So I think there's a lot of people out there trying to balance what the health experts are saying against, what the industry would then do to try to deliver an experience that rises to the appropriate standard.
Yeah, so that document set of guidelines is called Travel in a New Normal. So certainly check it out. There's a lot of great research and expertise gone into that. Arguably one of the biggest issues the industry is facing right now is funding for destination marketing organizations, but organizations of all types. There's going to be a crisis of funding for local and state governments. So in this environment, what sort of lessons and insights can each of you offer around how to get that immediate short-term recovery funding in place? You mentioned, Chris, the experience you had in terms of the $20 million. So what's your insights on this critical issue?
So I'll just offer up, and I know that DT and Urs can both respond specifically to this, but even in the best of scenarios, certainly in this instance, this has affected our destination marketing partners. Well, first and foremost, hospitality industry as a whole. No less, not the least of that is the lodging partners, whose occupancies have dropped to below single digits and been there for a while. So it's certainly against the destination marketing models that are primarily funded by destination tourist development tax or by what is the model that
tourism improvement districts or big tax
model. Those are being very challenged at the moment. So our DMOs are going to be really challenged. So in the best of worlds, and I put this slide up, this is really how Visit Florida was founded, how Brand USA was founded, and really is the foundation to the relationships that we have with our destination partners is, when we can take $1 and put it with $1 or another $1 and turn 1 + 1 into 2 or 3 or 4, or 1 + 1 + 1 into 4 or 5 or 6, in the best of scenarios, it helps us all extend still somewhat limited resources. When we're in a situation right now where some of our DMO partners have taken draconian measures that have required them to cut back in staffing and just in pretty much all the activities they're doing, they're not trying to put 1 + 1 to get to 3 or 4 or 5. We're trying to get less than 1 together with less than 1, just to get back to 1. So I really think that other than finding additional resource that would probably have to come from the public sector, as it has come through different relief packages, I think we're hopeful at the highest levels that there will be opportunity for funding to come to benefit the hospitality industry in a response mode. But until that comes, it's going to really require all of us pooling funds to figure out how do we make the limited resources reach beyond what they're able to do on their own.
Very good. DT, what's your perspective on recovery funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the biggest challenge we faced in any of these crises. There's never been a situation like this. We're sitting here in Central Florida with every single major hotel shut down for 2 months now, going on 2 months. You've never had that ever. I mean, even when we've dealt with like hurricanes and things, the recovery time is fairly quick, and you get make up a revenue when, like with a hurricane, we'll bring in that we'll house the National Guard, we'll house all these people that are working on the power lines and stuff in the hotels, and they brought revenue in. We're looking at 0 TDT dollars basically, for 2 months going now. And so the challenge, as Chris said, we don't know where we're going to come up with funding for next year. The budget's going to be very different from this year to next year. And so we're going to have to get very creative, I think. I don't know that there are going to be too many opportunities for additional funding, sources. One instance, one thing is, the DMOs were shut out of the PPP program because the majority of us are 501c6s, and they weren't allowed to apply. So, my board immediately came to me and said, "Are we applying for PPP?" And I'm like, "We can't apply. We don't qualify." So I think that we're going to just have to get really creative. The messaging that I'm sending to our Board of County Commission is that, if there are additional TDT dollars that, maybe right now they're spearheaded for capital improvements or some sort of, type projects like that. Maybe we need to look at diverting those for the short term into marketing to get businesses reopened and get things going again. But we're definitely going to have to get creative about what we're doing with those dollars, how we're spending them, and how we're reaching consumers and how we're reaching the trade. Because, the next year or two, I know from us, we're going to have to drastically cut back on our travel opportunities to get out on the road. We're going to have to look at other ways to communicate, the messaging and things like that. So it's going to be a very challenging time. As Chris said, there's some of the things that are happening around the country with layoffs and with furloughs from the DMO level is really, really scary. And so we're just going to have to get very creative and also, look at some regionalism and some co-op type dollars like that, where we can band together and work together and pool money together to market as a region. I think that there's going to be some good opportunities there, and maybe some opportunities that, sometimes these crises and things push us back into a corner, and we have to get creative, and we come out of it and we're like, wow, why weren't we doing some of this creative partnering and things beforehand? So, we're going to have to make some lemonade out of these lemons and see what we can do.
Thank you, DT. Ursula, what are your remarks on this?
I don't really have anything to add, and in the spirit of time, I know there's another question. So
okay, and I would just note that working with Civitas Advisors, Tourism Economics, and with the support of Destinations International and US Travel, that Miles Partnership is leading a study into DMO funding. What is the current situation? What's the outlook for recovery? And what are some options and alternatives? So we're going to be sharing in the next 4 to 6 weeks something that hopefully will be a resource to further this critical issue. Just in the final minute or so we have a few minutes left for questions. If each of you in 60 seconds or less could just identify a final sort of lesson, insight, or takeaway that you want to share with destinations who are grappling with the current crisis.
I'll offer up one to just say that I was talking to Tom Garzilli, our CMO, today, and I asked him that same question. He offered up the fact that the thing that makes this crisis different than any crisis we've ever faced is that it's a world pandemic. Those of us that are crisis managers and planners have always had that on our schedule and had to check the box, but we've never had in our lifetimes had to deal with one, and now we do. And so there's lots of questions. There's more questions than there are answers, because it's not just affecting the United States. It's not just affecting, single countries. It's affecting the entire world, and that is a whole different set of issues that we're having to deal with.
DT.
I think, the one thing that I've learned in the last few weeks is that you have to be completely nimble, and you have to things change. With this crisis, things are changing hourly, they're changing daily. What you said yesterday could be totally different from what the situation is today and tomorrow. So, we're just going to have to, be very nimble. And again, going back to what I initially said, communicate. I mean, with any crisis, that's the key to getting through it and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel is to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that you're communicating, out with everybody, your partners, with your elected officials, with your residents, with your customers, with, all of those types of things. And we didn't even touch on meetings and conventions, but that's a whole nother topic that we're dealing with in terms of what we're going to be doing. And what, that's the thing is with this crisis, what does a meeting look like in the future? How do we get people together in a big meeting or a convention? What are we going to have to do? So, that's a whole nother topic, but there's just so many question marks. And as Chris said, this is affecting the entire world, not just the United States or a region. And that's what's kind of scary about the whole thing.
And Ursula, your final thoughts?
I would just say this experience is humbling because it really shows how linked and interdependent we all are on one another. And I think that we need to take the time to remember that and be grateful for the things that we've all gone through together, and take this time to unite and support and protect one another, as we navigate these times, both personally and professionally.
Thank you. Just perhaps before we come to just one question in the last couple of minutes, I just want to highlight a couple of resources, including our COVID-19 education portal. And on there, you'll find we have summarized not just upcoming webinars ourselves, and next week, Arrivalist and one of the destination marketing organizations from New Zealand is going to be joining us, talking about the opening up of domestic tourism there, which provides, in a way, a sort of time shot into the future of how the recovery could unfold elsewhere. But this Thursday, actually, we've got a webinar with Expedia, and Stacey Melman, Visit Florida, is going to be sharing some of their perspective and insights on the recovery. So that's available on our website. It's this Thursday, 14th of May. Every week, we summarize our travel sentiment survey. Longwoods leads that research. We sponsor and support it. You can see a 2-page summary and a quick webinar we produce. And I'll talk more about this next week. The United Nations WTO World Travel Organization has just released in the last couple of days a fantastic tourism recovery program and toolkit. And they also actually have a directory of tourism support from around the world that helps provide guidance on what different regions, countries, states are doing. Perhaps just one question in the last minute. In terms of the impact of the crisis on funding, what sort of persistent impact did that have, DT and Chris, on your funding, and how did you sort of get funding back once the crisis had passed?
I guess, is that a question specifically as it relates to the past, or I'll just tell you, it's in the past. In all those, in the cases of Visit Florida, our funding was part of state appropriations, so it really wasn't affected like our DMO partners at the local level are being affected right now. So we were in a pretty fortunate position to not have to make draconian cuts like some of our DMOs are having to face right now. Here at Brand USA, our funding comes from a whole different source as it relates to ESTA fees paid by visitors from visa waiver countries. We have been planning for the kind of real chance that we might not be reauthorized. So a lot of the measures we put in place that are in place now, we were contemplating for a whole different reason. We certainly apply now. So we're in pretty decent shape at the moment. We see that as a great opportunity for us to be able to be in a position that a lot of our partners are looking for in recovery as it relates to being able to tell the story about what makes the United States once and not until it's safe to travel. The legal experts tell us, and the public experts tell us we can. The health experts tell us it's safe, and it's the appropriate time to do that. So that's the part that we're looking forward to as it relates to our ability to be able to help all of our partners, both brands and destinations.
Thank you so much, Chris. And just in the interest of time, let's wrap it up there. Let me thank again our panelists, Chris Thompson, DT Minnick, and Ursula Boll. Thank you so much for the time and energy and input and the thoughts you were able to bring. We'll be following up with the recording and with the slides and other resources from today. And thank you very much for everybody joining us. Stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to connecting again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.